Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled Uno Reverse Card MC. A bit of context. In my country we have 5 years of grade school aka primary education and 6 years of high school secondary education. Not quite sure how that correlates to other countries, but there you are. During my schooling years I was blessed with plenty of teachers who actually cared about students and their education, both academic and in values, strict, demanding but benevolent and nurturing. Some were brilliant in their own way, like the chem teacher who the last week of our final year taught us how to use raisins, rum and a wooden barrel to make a passable facsimile of whiskey. Despite being terrible at chem, I did learn that lesson. Or the ethics teacher who actually motivated us enough to dedicate half our Saturdays to alphabetize the less fortunate population of our local town, opening our eyes to the world around us and what needful really means. And then buying us beer as a reward. Again, final year, most of us were of legal drinking age and those who weren't were weeks away, different times. There were indeed mean teachers, bad teachers and phoning it in teachers, but from those I choose to take what I can use and ignore the rest. Paraphrasing my most beloved teacher, I have always been an annoying little crap, blowing off classes and then passing the tests, sometimes acking them, doing the bare minimum to pass except when the topic engaged me. When it did, here come the questions, the counterpoints and the general inquisitive jacasserie. That was just a phase though, and it's bound to end any moment now, or so I keep telling my wife. So, on to the story. Many moons ago, when dragons roamed the earth, to be more precise, in the year of our Lord of 1991 I was enrolled in my 4th year of high school, 2 years before the beers and the rum, don't worry. The high school I was in had a dress code that bordered on criminal. Everyday boys were supposed to wear this horrible short-sleeved yellow shirt with green stripes around the arm openings and neck, black pants, dudes and dudettes, black in a rainforest climate is no joke, with a black belt, yellow socks and black shoes. Gym day was a little better. Green t-shirt with yellow stripes, and a grey band around the left arm, for pizzazz I guess, yellow sweatpants with green lines down the legs, yellow socks and white trainers. I think the principal had a thing for lemons and limes, I can find no other explanation. A teacher would stand at the door checking every student for violations and sending students home for non-compliance. So, me being me, I tried to get sent home as often as possible for dress violations, as initially those didn't count as absences and I could claim my carefully cultivated and to this day nurtured legendary lack of memory as the reason. I could then spend the day reading, fishing or swimming the local river, not a lot unlike Tom Sawyer. In this particular day, I decided to blow off school on the day of the end of quarter assembly and I approached this by wearing socks of 2 different yellows. My left sock was almost neon and my right a very muted yellow. To make it all the more obvious I went with previous year's pants, a little tighter around the waist and crotch, but more importantly, almost 2 inches short, showing plenty of sock. In hindsight, the pants should have been enough to get me sent home, but that fateful day, our prefect of discipline, Mr. Absalon, real name, had door duty. He is one of the good ones, always finding teachable moments. So I went by Mr. Absalon and to make sure he saw me I bid him good morning. He greeted me back and smiled. What the hell, I was sure to be stopped and sent back, so I went back out and entered again, very slowly and joking around with schoolmates, calling attention to the idiot in the bright and muted yellow socks and short tight pants. He just waved me through. I went out a second time, and right before I reached him I bent down to tie my shoes, which were moccasins. He mentioned the non-matching socks, to which I just said, so? They're both yellow. He just laughed and said, you know what, you're right. I'm letting you go through. Who knows, you might get an education today. In other words, I see your malicious compliance, and I raise the stakes. How many cards? That in itself was awful, condemned to be all day in tight pants and stupid-looking yellow socks, stupider looking anyway, but during the assembly, right before the principal made the opening remarks, Mr. Absalon took the microphone and announced that on that assembly we would have a special helper, assisting the speakers with speech notes, microphone and water, and would dear Mr. Solver 39 please come up on stage to claim the role? Folks, I'm not a public person. I enjoy being anonymous and flying under the radar. That non-punishment was, in a word, brilliant and artfully applied. After the assembly, in which I conducted myself with as much dignity as can be commanded by one in pig-catching pants and 2 different socks, I was approached Mr. Absalon. He just said, "I trust you will be more aware of your uniform in the future." Yes, smiled and gave me a light slap on my shoulder. From that day, I made absolutely sure I could live with whatever I chose to wear, whether I meant to be sent home or not. And that, as the pig said, is it, folks. Next one is titled, "I Promise I Won't Give You a Second Parking Ticket." My brother used to be parking enforcement for the city. One day he was approached by a man while ticketing a car parked illegally. The man was upset, of course, at getting the ticket and failed to argue his way out of it, so he tried a new tactic. "Man, isn't true that once you put a ticket on my car you can't write anymore until I move it? Bro, as a matter of courtesy, no parking officer will ticket a car a second time while the first ticket is still on the windshield. That way we don't hit you up a second time without giving you a chance to move your car after the first ticket. Man, so I can just leave it here for the rest of the day and you won't put any more tickets on it? Bro, I promise won't give you a second parking ticket today. Man, then I'm staying here. Bye." With that, the man grabs the ticket and walks off, leaving his illegally parked car behind. My brother promised to not ticket the guy again, and he kept his word. However, upon noticing that the driver had taken his first ticket with him, bro radios for another parking officer to come over and help with his street. So of course second parking officer finds the illegally parked car, sees no existing ticket and therefore writes him a second ticket. Man arrives back later in the day and is livid. Goes hunting for brother. Finds him. "Man, you said you wouldn't ticket me a second time." "Bro, I didn't." "Who wrote the second ticket?" "Man, Officer 34. "Bro, I'm Officer 22, you can see that on your first ticket." "Man, but you said that as a courtesy no officer would write a second ticket." "Bro, sure, I said if they see the first ticket on the windshield they won't write a second ticket." "Did you leave the first ticket in place?" "Man, no." "Bro, so you made it so the second officer had no way of knowing you'd been ticketed already." "You can't blame her. And I promised I wouldn't ticket you again and I kept that promise. I tried to cut you a break but you did that to yourself. You can try to fight it by saying you didn't see the first ticket and I can give you the number to call for that, but by removing the first ticket you can't claim you didn't know about it. I tried to help you, sorry." The man muttered an apology and a thanks for trying to help, then disappeared again. Bro and other parking officer shared a good laugh about the guy who failed to game the system on the way back to the station. Next one is titled, "Open a Ticket for That, You Got It." All of this talk about tickets got me thinking. So I work for a large company that, like many, track IT issues by tickets. Some time back we had some major system issues, like the system was unstable for many days, disappearing data, etc. We didn't get immediate help and raised hell about it because these issues cost us real money. We were told they measure the significance of the problem by the number of tickets opened. I asked specifically, what if the system is down for everyone? Can't I, one of the managers, just put in a ticket and call to have it escalated? The answer was no. Oh, and the ticket system emails the appropriate people in IT and all management in my department. So when you open a ticket everyone in management is notified. You see where this is going. We had a major system issue a few weeks later and we had an issue with every customer at once. I opened Word, created a document with the basic problem and then grabbed a list of all of the customers I could get quickly. So only about 30. In rapid-fire fashion using copy and paste I opened 30 tickets in 30 minutes. About 20 minutes into this, management was being spammed with emails, as was IT. My IMs are lighting up and blinking with messages from co-workers, not IT, with messages like, "Enough," and "We get the point," and "Are you having fun yet, can you stop now?" Nothing acknowledging the severity of the issue. So I kept going. At 30 minutes my boss called me and told me he thinks I made my point. I agree. The issue got rather quickly resolved and we now have a new procedure. For serious problems where we have a large impact, I can open a ticket and send a few examples to an assigned IT liaison who can give it a look over for severity, and I usually have an answer in 60 seconds how they are going to escalate. Keep those ticket stories coming. Next one is titled, Have Fun Sorting Those. In 2013, I was in the middle of getting a divorce. I didn't have a lawyer, but my ex-husband did. This lawyer had been keeping the case going for close to 3 years for no reason. We had already been separated for years, we had no property to split, no money to split, and we had already agreed between ourselves on a custody situation for our kids. There was literally no reason for this woman to not be able to get our divorce finalized other than she was still working on it in order to collect more money from my ex-husband. Well, one day, I got a letter on the mail from her. My first thought was, this is finally happening. No. She was requesting 3 years worth of bank statements, check stubs, and tax returns from me. I called and informed her that we had no money to split, no one was using child support as we had the kids 50-50. And there was no reason we even needed to submit bank statements at all as we had always had separate bank accounts. But she told me the judge required this info before the divorce could be processed and sent me a subpoena for all the paperwork. Fine. I had to go to my bank to get the statements. Fortunately, it was free, but it was a stack of papers about 2 inches thick. It was at least 250 pages. Then tax returns. That was only about 30 pages. Then pay stubs. That was at least 150 pages. So this was a gigantic stack of papers I had to take to her. She had instructed me to bring them to her office, so I did. When I got there, she had a horrible attitude. She spoke to me like I was so far beneath her and like I was stupid. I told you to take these to the courthouse. They have to send them to me. The way she said it completely upset me. Plus, she had specifically told me to bring them to her. So I took them to the courthouse. But before I have them to the clerk, I took my carefully sorted paperwork and shuffled it like a deck of cards. Some right side up, some upside down, and all in random order. I shuffled them 5 to 6 times and walked to the clerk with a smile on my face. The clerk just had me sign something saying that I brought the necessary paperwork, then faxed it all over. I hoped that witch had to spend hours making sense of it. And my ex-husband had to pay for every minute of that time. Next one is titled, Show Up to Court for Jury Duty even though we impounded your car and the court is over 15 miles from my house, then tell me to Uber every day for a week? Seriously, malicious inbound. So anyway, last year I get contacted serve jury duty at $20 a day. It would cost $50 a day just to Uber over to the court, $25 there, $25 back. It was stupid. I was not spending my own money just to get rides back and forth to somewhere I don't want to be anyways. So I go for 2 days. The second day they assign me to sit in a jury box. The defense lawyer is asking questions as who would question police testimony of what happened? This is my cue to raise my hand and start ramblings about how I think the police can't be trusted, right in the middle of a courtroom in front of the jury and everybody. I go off on a rant about how I see the police and their actions and whether or not I can trust them. This lasted about 3 or 4 minutes. By the time I was done, the judge sent us out and my name was on the list of people who served and we're free to go home for the rest of the week. I didn't even want to be there anyways. My hatred of the police finally got me something, the duck off that jury box. Next one is titled, Standardized Testing, Only Read the Directions. After seeing a bunch of testing posts from the student perspective, I thought I'd offer one from the teacher perspective. This incident is part of why I decided to teach preschool instead of working in public education. I was finishing my degree in early childhood education and had to spend a full year in a classroom. The first half of the year was spent observing and teaching with the classroom teacher still in the room. The second half was teaching on my own. This also meant that I had to administer the standardized test in the spring. I have always hated standardized tests from the first time I had to take one. I dislike them even more from a teacher point of view. They don't accurately measure anything. They take away the ability to teach fun and cool things because every lesson has to meet a standard, and they are stressful and, in my opinion, harmful to students. My biggest issue is the fact that all students are required to take the grade level test, regardless of their actual learning level. So I had students who were reading at a first grade reading level and were getting intervention to help them catch up, but they were expected to read the entire test by themselves and still score well. I hate how schools use these scores to define students. Some students are allowed waivers or special help during the test, but there are only a certain number allowed per school, based on number of students, and they are reserved for the most impaired students. The week before the test comes and I was literally handed a packet on what to review with my students for best test performance, along with the packet of information on how to administer the test. Essentially, I read the introduction of the test, demonstrate how to fill in the bubbles, encourage best guess, and a few other things. Once the test has started, the only thing I can do if students have questions is read the section instructions to them. There are no specifics on how the instructions are to be read. On the day of the test, as expected, some of my students who normally received extra help were struggling. They couldn't understand what they were reading well enough to know what to do. Math was especially difficult for one of my students. Cue the MC. Because he struggled to read, the story problems were too difficult for him. He couldn't figure out enough of the words to set up the math problem. I wasn't allowed to read any part of the math problems for him. All I could do was read the section instructions, which read something to the effect of read each problem carefully. Determine whether it requires addition or subtraction to solve the problem. Write the problem in the testing booklet and record your answer on the answer sheet. I don't recall the exact wording, but that was basically it. When he came to me for help, I repeated to him what I was supposed to say, telling him that I can't give any specific help, but I can read the instructions to him. Nowhere did it say that I had to read the instructions word for word, or that I couldn't leave any words out. So the first time he needed help, the problem required addition to solve, so I read the instructions, read each problem carefully. Determine whether it requires slight pause addition to solve the problem. The next time he needed help, I read the same but omitted addition and emphasized subtraction. This didn't come close to giving him the support he should have been getting for this, but it at least gave him an idea of what to do. I wasn't going to let him completely fail because politicians have decided that a test score is more important than the student. Next on is titled, Time in Rank. My dad was the chief of a small university police department, with about 20 officers working for him. There were 3 ranks below chief, something like corporal, most of them, sergeant, a handful, lieutenant 1. Greater rank gave greater authority and, nominally, higher pay, at the expense of greater responsibility and more paperwork. Seniority within rank was based on how long you had been in your current rank, and was mostly used as a tool for selecting preferred shifts and overtime. Newest in rank usually ended up working night shift and had no hope of holidays off. This one officer, let's call him Don, was generally a pain in the butt. Complained all the time, tried to cut corners, shirked duties, filed grievances that were invariably dismissed as unfounded, got caught smoking at a desk in a no-smoking office while actually playing with the little bronze no-smoking sign that was sitting there. He was a corporal for a long time, eventually near the top of the time in rank list of 15 or so corporals, so generally had his preferred shifts, whatever overtime he wanted, etc. Then he decided to take the sergeant's exam, and God bless him, he passed it, and got the rank and the small pay increase, and the responsibility and paperwork that came with it. He was also at the bottom of time in rank as a sergeant, which meant a lot of night shifts and holidays as there were only 4 to 5 sergeants but always at least one on duty. After a few months, the responsibility and paperwork chafed him to the point Don asked to be demoted back to corporal. Actually, he demanded to be demoted. The phrase, "this is BS," was used a lot, F-bombs may have been dropped, and such language was simply not tolerated by the chief. The chief tried to reason with him, tried to explain the full implications of such a demotion, but Don kept cutting him off and demanding to be bumped back down to corporal. The chief stopped arguing and prepared the paperwork, which Don signed a few days later without reading. Note, it was all perfectly normal change in rank paperwork, spelling out the details. There were no special little gems added for Don's benefit. The only difference is that the forms were normally used to change a rank up, not down. And so, Don got his wish and was bumped back down to corporal, giving up the authority of a sergeant, but also giving up the responsibility and extra paperwork that he hated. He probably already knew he was giving up the smallish pay increase, and went back to his previous salary. What he did not realize, and wouldn't listen when the chief tried to tell him, is that as of the demotion, he became the newest corporal on the list, dead last for time in rank, and was stuck with third shift and holidays and whatever overtime nobody else wanted, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Last one is titled, "The Time I Refused a £150 alcohol sale to an arrogant customer." When I first started working, I was 16. Here in the UK, we have a policy called Think 25, which means that we ID anybody buying an age-restricted item if they look under 25 years old. On top of this, if the cashier is under 18, they need to ask permission from a colleague who is over 18 in order to sell an age-restricted product. For 16-year-old me, this was a big faff for 2 years. Additionally, I worked in a big supermarket, which, sensibly, takes age restrictions very seriously. Every time a customer tried to buy a Think 25 item, like alcohol, I had to turn to the person behind me and ask for permission. This provoked a constant stream of jokes from customers, which I'm sure they believed I'd never heard before. "Ooh, I haven't been mistaken for a youngster in years, I'm so flattered," etc. etc. It wore thin quickly, but I always laughed and explained it was just because I was under 18. Until one day, when a man in his 50s came to my till. He was with a much younger woman, not judging, just explaining, and kept bragging to me and her about his purchases. He also laughed when I offered to pack his bag and said, obviously, in a condescending tone. I was alone on the tills, as it was late, and so I buzzed for a supervisor to come over and allow me to sell him alcohol. I'd find out later that she'd served him before, and that he was incredibly rude and condescending to her as well. Since this man was clearly over 25, I continued to scan his items whilst I waited for the supervisor. He continued to brag, telling the woman that nobody who worked in the store could afford what he was buying. She looked embarrassed, but I kept my head down and ignored the provocation. Finally, with about 6 bottles of wine left to scan and bag, my supervisor appeared. She looked him up and down. "Yup," she said, "you can sell," and turned to walk away. The man laughed. "Ooh, am I being ID'd?" he asked me, in a patronizing tone. My supervisor, who was about 10 hours into her shift and never had time for anyone's crap anyway, turned back around. I said my usual, "Oh no, I'm just under 18 etc. etc. bit, but the man would not give up. "I'm flattered, aren't you going to ID me then?" He nudged the lady beside him and winked. "Okay," I said, "can I see some ID please?" I was actually figuring I would just humor him, and then he'd be happy and leave. Instead, he looked quite taken aback. He stammered a bit, patting his pockets. "I don't have it on me," he told me, "I never get ID'd so." I looked to my supervisor, who had this incredibly smug look on her face. She walked back over to us, and said, "I'm sorry sir, once we've asked for ID it's company policy that we cannot complete the transaction until we've seen proof that you are over 18. We can hold your items here until you can provide it." The man went bright red, and asked if the woman's ID would be enough, but it wasn't. We lost about £150 in sales, but for my supervisor and I, who both knew the huge turnover our store saw each day would not be impacted, it was one huge victory, and it kept me going through every mind-numbing age-restricted transaction until I finally turned 18 and could sell it myself. It felt incredibly petty, but at the end of the day, the man asked to be ID'd and, for once, I really was just doing my job. Thanks for listening.